Good evening and welcome to Crossroads. The European Commission is calling for censorship that could affect the United States. They want Twitter, now known as X, to begin filtering content in line with European law. Now, on October 10th, the European Commissioner, Thierry Breton, sent an open letter to Elon Musk, and he wrote that following the terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas against Israel, we have indications that your platform is being used to disseminate illegal content and disinformation in the EU. Now, in response, Elon Musk thanked him, and he kindly told him that if Europe wants to censor content on the platform, then it will need to publicly list the violations. In this way, everybody will be able to see whether the European Commission is trying to fight against actual disinformation and hateful content, or whether it's simply using the labels as a political tool, which is what many people, myself included, suspect this is actually really about. Now, in my personal opinion, it looks like the message from the European Commission has little to do with Israel and little to do with anti-Semitism. I don't believe it even has to do with actual disinformation. Instead, frankly, it just looks like another authoritarian censorship program from the international socialists. And it looks like they're using the Hamas terror attacks as an excuse to push an agenda they were already trying to enact. The narrative they were using before was that hateful speech is on the rise, anti-Semitism is allowed to spread on Twitter. Now, remember, this was also part of Musk's online dispute with the ADL. It's the Anti-Defamation League. The group, which claims it's dedicated to stopping anti-Semitism, was also accusing Musk of allowing anti-Semitism on the platform. And that dispute, well, it ended in a similar way to the recent post from the European Commission on Censorship. The terrible irony with the Israel-Hamas war, though, is that most of the anti-Semitism is not coming from the right. It's coming from the left. It's coming from the same groups that were trying to preach to all of us about extremism and about hate speech. In a now deleted post, the New York branch of the Democratic Socialists of America was promoting, it was the pro-terrorist and anti-Israel rallies. Those are the ones where people were celebrating the terrorist attacks on the streets of New York. The European Commission, well, have they been talking about that? No, they've been oddly silent on it. In fact, they've been oddly silent about this shocking outpouring of anti-Semitism and pro-terrorist comments coming from across the spectrum of leftist organizations. Democratic Representative Rashid Tlaib, who is a Palestinian, was questioned over continuing to display a Palestinian flag in front of her office after the attacks. She was also confronted by a Fox reporter who asked her to comment on the terror attacks, and she appeared to refuse. Watch.
Hamas terrorists have cut off babies' heads and burned children alive. Do you support Israel's rights to defend themselves against this brutality?
We're just going to go through here.
You can't comment about Hamas terrorists chopping off babies' heads?
The Black Lives Matter branch in Chicago, they also sparked a very strong debate after the group posted a now deleted image on Twitter showing a parachuter with a Palestinian flag and the statement, quote, "I stand with Palestine." Now, given that the Hamas terrorists used parachutes to carry out the attacks of murder, rape, and kidnappings, that was taken as a direct endorsement for terror attacks. A video then began making rounds from 2015, where at a Harvard Law School event titled Globalized Ferguson, Radicalized Policing and International Resistance, the BLM founder publicly stated her support for Palestine and condemned Israel.
The other thing I'll say is Palestine is our generation South Africa. And if we don't step up boldly and courageously to end the imperialist project that's called Israel, we're doomed. We can have a whole conversation about the settlements that we witnessed, the stories of murder and death at the hands of Israelis and Zionists.
Now, many people in the Jewish community, including many who previously supported BLM, publicly condemned it. Many universities were also criticized for their response to the terror attacks. At Harvard University, more than 30 groups, student groups, they publicly stated their support for Hamas, and that was just following the terror attacks before Israel had really responded. They alleged that Israel was entirely responsible for what the Hamas terrorists did. Now, those students at Harvard, they sparked serious backlash, including from former professors and from organizations that donate to the university. And then Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, he was visibly bothered by the way the establishment media are covering these attacks. He voiced his concern during an interview with MSNBC. Watch.
I am angry. I am angry with the world that allowed the dehumanization of Israelis and sanitized the terrorism of Hamas. I must say, I love this show and I love this network, but I've got to ask, who is writing the scripts? Hamas, the people who did this, they are not fighters, Jonathan. They are not militants, and I'm looking right at the camera. They are terrorists. It is a barbarian who rapes and brutalizes women, who kills children in front of their parents.
Now, he goes on to list the many other atrocities that the Hamas terrorists committed. And he's not wrong either on how the media is covering this really across the whole establishment. The New York Times, they were exposed for editing an article to change the description of Hamas from terrorists to gunmen. Now, after they were criticized, they edited it back to terrorists. But it was alleged that not only them, but other news outlets as well had guidance to not describe Hamas as a terrorist organization. Now, all of this led to what looks like an introspection among some on the left. CNN even addressed it openly. Watch.
These last few days have been a real eye-opening period for a lot of people, a lot of Democrats, a lot of progressives, in terms of anti-Semitism on the left. A lot of people who seem more shocked at dehumanizing language used by world leaders to describe Hamas than what Hamas actually perpetrated on Saturday.
Now, in a very interesting move as well, many leaders who I would actually regard as relatively far left came out to condemn the comments and the actions from the more extreme factions on the left. Following the pro-Hamas and anti-Israel rallies in Canada, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau actually condemned the protests. He wrote on X, quote, "The glorification of violence is never acceptable in Canada by any group or in any situation. I strongly condemn the demonstrations that have taken place and are taking place across the country in support of Hamas." Now, attacks on Israel as well. Let's stand against the acts against terror, he said. Now, following the Democratic Socialists of America rally in New York City, where the protesters also openly praised the terrorist attacks against Jews, Mayor Eric Adams also condemned the terrorists. And he said this about the protests. "At the time when innocent people are being murdered and children are being abducted in Israel, it is revolting that this group of extremists would support terrorism. I oppose this. The city of New York rejects this." And he was joined as well. New York Governor Kathy Hochul also denounced the protests, notably that had been organized by the Democratic Socialists of America. Now, I mentioned previously that President Joe Biden would be put in a very difficult position when it comes to narratives. His administration and many of his supporters, they have been condemning conservatives as extremists. They've been alleging there's rising anti-Semitism on the right. When it comes to Israel and Palestine, though, many in his party ironically side with Palestine, even when it comes to terror attacks. Folks, that's it for YouTube. For the rest of the episode, come join us on Epoch TV. We're going to have a great interview. We spoke with one of the survivors of the Hamas terror attacks on the rave. Really incredible story, talking about how he and a group of friends escaped, what actually took place, what they saw. Again, join us for that on Epoch TV, EpochTV.com. We have a lot of other great content there, the rest of my episode, other shows, movies, documentaries, and you also help us keep doing the reporting we're doing. So come join us in Epoch TV, and I will see you there. What is the real story of America? Why did the Founding Fathers choose a republic over a democracy? And what would the world be if the bedrock of the American Constitution was lost?